All right. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I am excited to share a recipe with you that is based on the idea of a bowl. If you haven't heard of this concept before, it's the idea of taking a protein, a grain, and lots of veggies and putting them together with some delicious sauce that makes it super easy to chow down. So tonight we're going to make a Tex Mex Bowl. And we're going to start with, oh dear. Let's see if I can get, there we go. I went too far, too fast. Okay. We're going to start with some tofu. Tofu is a fun thing to play with because it will take on any flavor that you give it. In this one, we're going to make a marinade for it, in which I used Bragg's liquid aminos, which is kind of like a soy sauce, almond butter, which you can buy. I make my own, but you can buy it easily in the store. A tiny bit of maple syrup and some cumin. And all we do is mix this together. It looks kind of gross in the bowl, but you put it together in the bowl and then just mix it with a fork until it's homogeneous. And then you're going to coat your tofu after you cut it up. This recipe calls for 7 ounces of tofu, so I cut it in little strips and then put the sauce over the top of it. And you only have to marinate this for about 20 minutes and just kind of let it set. I put it in the sauce and then flipped it over and added the sauce on the other side as well. So while that's sitting there waiting for you, you can go ahead and prep your veggies. Now, in this particular recipe, I did not use a grain. I switched from using rice, brown rice, to making a cauliflower rice, which we've talked a little bit about cauliflower rice before. You can buy riced cauliflower in the store already prepped in the fresh section of the store. You can also buy it frozen. And with me, I just bought I had a whole head of cauliflower and I just took it and shredded it. So you can do that as well. Very simple, doesn't take any time at all, and it cooks very quickly. So you can also season this. This I didn't season because we're going to make a sauce for it, which is delicious, and it didn't need anything extra to it. And again, cauliflower is very versatile. You can add all kinds of flavors to it because it doesn't have a distinct flavor of its own. And then you can prep the rest of your veggies. Let's see, I ended up using several different things, but you want to use some seasonal veggies. This part is going to be for our sauce, but you know, this is a perfect time of year for all the seasonal veggies. I have tomatoes coming on. I have cucumbers in my garden. I have a huge zucchini. Yes, this is a zucchini, a special kind of zucchini growing in my garden. And delicata squash, you know, there's all kinds of things that you can put into these bowls. And then after that, we make this dressing, and this dressing is based with avocado. Most dressings that you'll ever try have 3 main elements that make them good, and generally a 4th to make it extra good. And that's a fat, an acid, and salt. And you see, I don't even have salt here, and I added it later, but this recipe does call for salt. And then generally there's some kind of sweetener in most dressings, but as you see, this one does not have any. This has your avocado, lemon, garlic. That also adds a little bit of kick to it. And then fresh basil in the front, parsley and dill. And you can use any kind of fresh herb that you want, or you can totally leave it out if you want as well. And yes, it uses garlic powder and fresh garlic. And I just threw this all in the blender. It took just a couple of seconds to get that all in, and then blend it up till it's smooth. And then put that all together with your fresh vegetables, and you have a delicious meal. Thank you for letting me share all of these recipes with you over the past several weeks. I hope you all have fun successfully continuing in your own creative journey with food. Thank you.
All right. Well, it's good to be back with you for our final session. And today we're going to talk about sleep and its effect on blood sugars. And as always, I hope that you've enjoyed making lifestyle changes in this class. And I encourage you as you continue this lifestyle journey to work closely with your healthcare provider. You and your healthcare provider will make a great team and together can achieve optimal results. I'd like to tell you about a patient that I'll call Mrs. D. She was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes at age 60 last year in June. And she was immediately started on metformin, 2,000 milligrams a day, and the maximal dose of Januvia. About a month after she was diagnosed with diabetes, she went through a plant-based course I think through a friend. And so she learned how to eat plant-based. And she said this lifestyle course was, quote, such a blessing. And it was especially a blessing because 3 months after her diagnosis, her A1C had reduced markedly, and so she was able to stop metformin. By December, she had lost 25 pounds, and she was exercising 2.5 hours a week, so she was getting her 150 minutes of cardiovascular activity in. So in addition to following a healthy diet, she was doing the exercise. She decided to attend a residential lifestyle intervention program starting the end of December, and she was due for another A1C. By that time, it was 5.0. So I stopped Januvia. You may know, but the Januvia website says that Januvia will lower A1C by about 0.7. So even if we add 0.7 to her A1C of 5.0, with her being off Januvia, her A1C would still be in a good range for someone with diabetes or someone with barely in the prediabetes range. So she continued at this lifestyle program, her 100% vegetarian diet. She started to eat more whole foods. She was eating some refined vegan foods, but started eating more nuts instead of oils, etc., for her fat. And she had been eating 3 meals a day, with dinner or her evening meal being the largest meal. And at this lifestyle program, she switched to doing early time restricted feeding, where she was eating an early breakfast and then a lunch and fasting for 17 hours overnight. So in the 3 weeks of this lifestyle intervention, she lost another 5 pounds. She was very thankful for her journey and for her new diet. And I think what's really amazing about this story is that Mrs. D had lost both of her parents due to COVID in April of 2020. She'd also experienced loss of a job during the pandemic. So just 2 months before she was diagnosed with diabetes, she'd undergone some personal tragedies. Yet she was a Christian with a strong faith in God. And her experience shows that even during times of emotional challenge, a person's physical health can improve and diabetes can still rewind. Sleep is important for anyone wanting to prevent or reverse type 2 diabetes. According to the American College of Endocrinology's guidelines for type 2 diabetes, they say that sleep, that is adequate amounts of sleep and good quality sleep, is the third lifestyle treatment for type 2 diabetes. So it's the treatment that comes after nutrition and exercise in their guidelines. Sleep needs do change as we go through the lifespan. Infants and children need quite a bit more sleep than adults, but for adults, the typical recommendation is 7 to 9 hours. And this is the same recommendation for persons with diabetes. A study of over 3,000 individuals in Japan looked at sleep quality and quantity, and they assessed sleep through the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. All the individuals in this study had type 2 diabetes, and they were sleeping on average 6.4 hours per night. And they broke this group of 3,000 individuals into 4 quartiles, and they were based on A1C. So those in the highest A1C quartile had A1C values of at least 7.9. And those with the highest A1Cs were sleeping 6.23 hours on average per night. Also, those with the highest A1Cs had the worst sleep quality. So the shorter sleep duration for persons in this study is kind of striking because on average, Japanese sleep 7.7 hours per night. So people with diabetes in the study overall were getting less than an hour or more than an hour of sleep less than Japanese in general. And those with the highest A1Cs were quite sleep restricted compared to the average Japanese individuals. So we see from this study, there are two basic keys for sleep. There's sleep quality and sleep quantity. And we'll see that if either of these is compromised, blood sugars seem to rise. Why is sleep restriction linked with higher blood sugars? Well, there are probably a number of reasons, and we'll look at some hormonal reasons. Epinephrine is a hormone that is sometimes called adrenaline. It's one of the hormones that goes up when we feel stressed or are in a fight or flight situation. Healthy individuals were in a sleep lab and they slept from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. for a couple of nights, and their blood epinephrine levels were monitored throughout the night when they were sleeping this full 7 hours. Then they were sleep restricted so that they still went to bed and to sleep around 11 p.m., but they were awakened at 3 a.m. And after that early morning awakening, cortisol levels rose significantly. So loss of sleep and disordered sleep, sorry, not cortisol, epinephrine. So epinephrine is a stress hormone. Cortisol is another stress hormone. But in this study, we're looking at epinephrine. So epinephrine rose quite a bit when these people were sleep deprived in the early morning. And epinephrine increases insulin resistance and increases blood sugars. So higher epinephrine levels with sleep restriction may be one reason that sleep restricted individuals have higher blood sugars. Now, cortisol, which I mentioned, is another hormone that rises with stress. And again, studies of individuals in a sleep lab who are sleep restricted for one evening had a rise in cortisol levels. Cortisol can be measured or it can be assessed over the long term through hair levels. So if you assess the level of cortisol in a person's hair, you can see what their average cortisol level was for a long period of time. And this study looked at shift workers, and they also looked at day workers and their hair cortisol levels. And they found that regardless of age, persons who worked shifts had higher cortisol levels compared to persons who worked consistent hours during the day. And cortisol is another hormone that raises blood sugars. Now, inflammation may also represent a pathway that links reduced sleep with type 2 diabetes risk. So this study involved healthy individuals who were in a sleep lab. They were sleep restricted. And in one part of the study, they were sleep restricted at night. So they normally slept at night, and then their sleep at night was just reduced, but they were still sleeping during the nighttime hours. And in another part of the study, they were sleep restricted, but their sleeping time was shifted to the day. And this was called misaligned sleep. So you can see that insulin sensitivity went down significantly when they were sleep restricted, but still sleeping at night. But insulin sensitivity went down a lot more when they were sleep restricted and their sleep was misaligned to the daytime. HSCRP is a marker of inflammation, and it especially correlates with inflammation in our blood vessels. HSCRP rose when these individuals' nights were shortened, nights of sleep, but it rose even more when their sleep was restricted and shifted to the day. So not only does insulin resistance increase, but inflammation increases when our sleep patterns are reduced or are misaligned. Now, we have parts of our body that control circadian rhythms, and these are called clocks. The main clock is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's called a central clock, and it's located in the brain. And then we have peripheral clocks, which are located in other organs. And these different clocks impact each other. Now, as for the most powerful clock, as I mentioned, we're talking about the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and that's largely influenced by light coming through our eyes. There's a neuronal tract from the back of our eyes to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And there's another tract that goes from the SCN to our pineal gland, which regulates melatonin secretion. So light during the day suppresses melatonin secretion and supports alertness, and darkness at night allows melatonin to rise and induce sleep. So does light exposure affect diabetes risk? Well, a study of 29,000 women in Sweden asked these women a bunch of questions in the early 90s. They asked them about their sun exposure habits. So these questions involved how much they sunbathed during the winter while on vacation, how often they vacationed abroad, asked about their general sunbathing habits, as well as how much time they spent working outdoors during the summer. 10 years later, these women were resurveyed. They were able to survey 24,000 of the women at that time. And again, they were asked about their sun exposure habits. They were also asked whether they had type 2 diabetes, and they were questioned about their exercise as well as their height and weight. And the researchers were able to factor out the effects of exercise as well as weight and tobacco use. And they found that active sun exposure habits reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes about 30%. And so they concluded that sunlight is involved in glucose metabolism. So if you spend more time daily in the sun, your sleep will likely improve and you may have lower blood sugars as well. Now, in addition to light exposure, meal times can help set our circadian rhythms. And you can see here that the timing of our meals impacts our peripheral clocks. Intermittent fasting may actually help improve sleep. Intermittent fasting involves eating within a consistent window of time. And if it does, and there are certain types of intermittent fasting like time-restricted feeding, where you eat during a certain window of the 24-hour cycle, and that consistency can reinforce circadian rhythms. Also, orexin A, a neurotransmitter, which is tied to alertness, was found to be higher during the day and lower at night in individuals who did intermittent fasting. So these individuals felt more alert during the day and could enjoy more restful sleep. And then there's growth hormone. Intermittent fasting also affects growth hormone levels. So healthy men were observed to have higher levels of growth hormone, significantly higher after 1 day of fasting compared to when they weren't fasting. Growth hormone helps to burn fat, restores muscles, helps the body repair at a cellular level. And as a result, people who fast may wake up feeling more refreshed and restored after sleeping. But is any type of intermittent fast okay for our circadian rhythms and for our sleep? Well, intermittent fasting could lead to sleep challenges depending on the timing of the meals. When people eat at irregular times, that could disrupt their sleep. And this is especially true if they eat late at night, which can cause the body's temperature to rise and make sleep onset more difficult. Heavy meals, also too close to bedtime, may upset our stomach and make it hard to fall asleep, and also disrupt our sleep quality. I think pizza eaten late at night is notorious for disrupting sleep. One study looked at 57 adults who were overweight or obese around the time of Ramadan. Labs were done 1 week before the start of the Ramadan fast, and then after 28 days of Ramadan fasting. At the end of the 28 days of fasting, leptin was significantly reduced, and melatonin was also reduced compared to before the fast. And leptin is important because it is a hormone that helps us to feel satisfied after we eat. It's made by our fat cells, and it basically it tells our brain that we've consumed enough food, or it signals the brain that we've eaten enough, and so we tend to eat less. Melatonin is also an important hormone, as we know, because it helps us sleep. So these hormonal changes after a fast involving late night eating were not ideal. So in summary, the recommended duration of sleep for adults with diabetes is the same as for adults without diabetes, and that is 7 to 9 hours per night. Short sleep duration, that less than 7 hours per night, is associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. Daytime bright light exposure, as in outdoor light entering our eyes, is a key to setting our circadian rhythms. And a second key that we've discussed for setting our circadian rhythms is meal times, and especially eating early in the day can help set our biological clocks and can also help to optimize our hormonal levels as well as our blood sugars. In the next lecture, we'll look at some final tips for success. We'll see you back soon.
Hey, good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all. It's our last time together, and I've been reflecting on what I wanted to share with you. We've talked about several key components. Our first night, we talked about habits and how important they are in our life. And if we can learn principles of health that drive our habits, our life will be so much better. We talked about the habits that we see in the Bible. Daniel had habits, a habit of daily prayer, and how that influenced his life and gave him strength to face what he had to face in his own experience. We talked about choice and how in the Garden of Eden, God gave each of us this powerful thing called choice, and how that influences our health choices and how our life turns out. We talked about grit, how things that are worth having are worth working hard for, and how that's important in our health and our life. And then we talked about power. There's these powerful forces in life that try to shape who we are, sometimes outside of us, sometimes within us. And we talked about one of the greatest sources of power in this world is God's word. God's word has actual power to transform us. So tonight I want to talk about purpose. Probably why this is heavy on my mind. I just finished a book by a guy named Viktor Frankl. Viktor was in the Auschwitz concentration camp, and he was a psychologist. He was a Jew, but he was like a psychologist, and so his time in there, it caused him to really reflect on how people interacted with difficult experiences in their life. And he found that the title of the book is called The Search for Meaning. And he found that having meaning or purpose in our life is really powerful. And so I just ask you a question, what is your purpose in life? Why are you here? What meaning does life have for you? This came home to me in a very real way. I used to have a construction business. I built homes. I was a carpenter. I wasn't a contractor. I was a carpenter, and I just did the construction of the actual building. And there was a very large home that we were building. It was 10,000 square feet up on top of a mountain overlooking Chattanooga Valley. It's funny, the larger the home, the less people live in it. There was 2 people that lived in this home. Anyway, we had built the walls in the basement, the floor system, and we were working on the main walls. And the great room had a massive wall. It was 22 feet wide, 26 feet wide, 22 feet tall, built out of heavy timbers, 2x6s. It had many windows, and so it had all these beams above the windows. And I had a crew of there was 7 guys there, and we were trying to pick this wall up. We could not pick the wall up just with our hands. It was too heavy. We had to have these special jacks. I had 2 of them. I had one on each side of the wall, and we were using these jacks. They slid over 2x4s, and they would jack up the 2x4, and they would lift the wall up. The wall had reached about a 45-degree angle, and I was standing almost on top of an 8-foot step ladder, and one of my workers was on top of a 6-foot step ladder. He had run out of room, and he said, "Just a minute, I got to get down and get a taller ladder." So I had, "No problem, Nathan, I'm fine, go for it." So he gets down off his ladder. When he does, he bumps the bottom of the jack on his side accidentally, and I heard it break. When I did, I felt the whole wall shift and began to fall. I had some guys that were under the wall. They were holding it up with 2x4s just to get some extra support, and they all ran. I was alone under this very heavy wall holding it, and everything within me did not want that wall to fall on top of me. I mean, I think you can understand. And so I tried to hold the wall. It was totally impossible. The whole wall came crashing down, and it just slammed on the ground. I was under that wall. I was stunned. I was laying there, and then all of a sudden I realized I was alive, like I was okay. And I began, and I heard my guys yelling, Chris, you under there? Yeah, I'm here, get me out. So they got the wall off of me. And let me tell you what happened. It's just amazing. I'm still amazed, is that when I fell, you know, I told you I was on top of the ladder, but somehow when the wall came down, I ended up inside of the step ladder. I have no idea. I was inside the step ladder, and the wall crushed the step ladder, and it held it just off of my shoulder. That ladder was crushed. I mean, I was just so grateful. I kept that ladder for years. Actually, every time I saw it, I recognized that ladder. That ladder took my place. But you know, the one thing that I wanted at that moment when I was under the wall is I wanted to live. Like, I wanted life. I didn't want to die. And Jesus tells us that he came to give us life, and life more abundantly. You know, he doesn't just want us to live a miserable life, a miserable experience. He came because he wants to give us an abundant life. And what is that life like? There's a story that's told in the Bible. It's a powerful story. You can find it in 3 of the Gospels. There was a lady that had been experiencing health problems. For 13 years, she had been experiencing health problems. And the Bible says she had an issue of blood. And Mark tells us, the Gospel of Mark tells us that she had been to many physicians and she suffered at their hands. I mean, some of you have been to doctors, and you could probably identify with that experience, suffering at the hands of doctors. No offense, Dr. Nelson, Dr. Aysha, no offense there, but sometimes doctors cause us to suffer a little bit. Anyway, she suffered there. She heard about Jesus, and she went because she had hope that he could provide something better for her. And indeed, he did. There was a crowd of people, and she pressed her way through the crowd. And the Bible tells us that she could barely reach him, and she touched the hem of his garment. And when she did, the Bible says immediately she was healed. She knew she was healed. Jesus paused, and he says, wait a minute, someone touched me. And the disciples are like, wait a minute, Jesus, you're in a crowd of people. Everyone's bumping around you. Of course, somebody touched you. And Jesus says, no, power has gone from me. And the woman at that moment confessed, it was me. I touched your garment, and I was healed. And Jesus turned about to her, and he says, woman, go in peace. Your faith has made you whole. Why was it that Jesus paused in the midst of the crowd? I mean, the Bible says she was already healed. Immediately when she touched his garment, she was healed within. Why was it Jesus paused to have that dialogue? I mean, Jesus was Jesus. Jesus knew exactly why, who had been healed, and the circumstances of her life. As I reflect on the story, it seems to me that the only reason that Jesus paused and brought attention to the story was so that the crowd could recognize that she had experienced his power in her life. The crowd needed to know. They were bumping up against him. The crowd needed to know that there was something. Jesus was more than just a man. He was someone who wanted to give them an abundant life. And the way to find that abundant life was by coming into connection with him, by having faith in him. What is the purpose of your life, my life? It's more than just my own selfish existence and feeling good about myself. It's to come in connection with God, and also to share that blessing with others. You know, as she shared with the crowd what had happened in her life, it was a blessing to them, and it was also a blessing to herself. You know, we weren't created just for our own existence, but we were created to be a blessing to others. I mean, that's God's very nature. He's a blessing to others. He gives purpose and meaning. God has given each one of you a purpose. You're not here on accident. Even if you came into existence because of circumstances that you didn't plan, none of us planned. God has a purpose and a meaning for your life. My name was supposed to be Kimberly. My parents thought I was gonna be a girl, and they were shocked when a boy came out. They had to come up with another name, and Christopher is what I got. Not everyone has the same plan for you, even your parents, that God has for you. And God has a reason for your existence. He's placed you here for a purpose. And you've come to this program and you've gone through this, and God is doing things in your life because he cares for you. He has a purpose for your life, and he loves you. There's a powerful verse that's told us in the end of the Bible, Revelation chapter 21. This verse gives me hope. As healthy as I can live here, I try to live healthy. I try to eat healthy, try to exercise. I ran 4 miles this morning. I try to be as healthy as I can, but at some point I'm going to reach, 100, 105, 110. And at someday I'm going to die. That's the fact, is we're all going to die. But God has a better purpose for us than what we're in existence for right now. The Bible actually paints a picture of something better to come. And I want to share this with you in Revelation chapter 21. It says, John says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be any mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. And he who is seated on the throne said, behold, I will make all things new. This world is disappointing. I mean, we'll get healthy, but it's someday we're going to perish. If we have made the choice by faith to connect with the one who gave his life for us, Jesus, he has a better place in store for us. He will make all things new. I can't wait till that day when all things are made new. I've got this pain in my hip. It's just there with me continually. It'll be gone. I think I'm getting arthritis. My knuckles are just aching all the time. That's going to be gone. God says he's going to make all things new. I can't wait for that day. I hope you can't wait for that day. And I look forward to seeing you in the New Jerusalem if we don't see each other this coming Sabbath. So God bless you all. Thank you for being a part of this program. I'm still praying for you. And we just pray that God will continue to guide you in your journey with him. God bless you all.
Good evening, everyone. This evening, we are going to recap some of the principles that we have learned throughout this program. Again, I'm going to invite you to use the time that I am talking to stand up and do a little exercise yourself. So feel free to move where you are while you are listening to my voice, and I will share my screen here so that you can see a recap of the information that we have learned. Okay, so what we have learned so far. We learned about burst training the first night, and the goal of burst training is to get our hearts pumping. We need that aerobic exercise, and that helps our body to move the blood that carries our nutrients, helps get water to the rest of our body, helps take waste from the cells where they have been using the byproducts, and be able to send that waste out to be filtered. It aids in the healing processes of our body. So our goal is to keep that blood pumping around our body. In order to do that, we perform bursts of activity at a higher intensity than our normal pace. How will we know? Because we won't have the same breath rate that we had when we started, right? We won't have the same heart rate. We may feel like our heart is about to leap out of our chest at some point. We won't be able to talk in full sentences, and it may be slightly uncomfortable, which is probably why a lot of us don't like doing cardio exercise. But the goal is to hit it hard and take a break. So you choose a form of exercise you can do easily and safely. We went through this with walking as our exercise. You can do things like sitting to stand from a chair. You can do activities all sorts of ways, but walking is a simple form, and you're going to start by your warm-up, walking at a normal pace, doing 3 to 5 minutes of just getting that heart used to an increased activity before you give it as much as you can to go as fast as you can. If all you can do is a slow jog, that's okay. If you can do that safely, go for it. And you continue at that burst of activity level 4. We started at 20 to 30 seconds, somewhere in there. Remember that this feels difficult because your breathing should be on that line between the yellow and the orange, between the hard and the really hard. It should be difficult to do. If you're new to cardio exercise, then 20 seconds is a great starting point. Anytime that you have to stop, prepare to go back quite a bit. Even it may be back to 20-second bursts. That's okay, because you'll probably find that your body trains faster than it did the first time you went through. So start where you can at 20 seconds and then continue to work your way up. You will complete your burst training, returning to a walk at a normal pace. And you will do this burst to normal pace pattern at least 3 times in a workout, up to 5 times in a workout to complete an exercise session. You will end your exercise session doing a cool down walk at a normal pace for 3 to 5 minutes so that your heart can return to its normal heart rate activity. The goal is your heart should be pounding when you're doing these bursts. And once you've completed that burst, you want your heart rate to slow safely. You want to catch your breath. You want to drink water to hydrate after the exercise. And you want to make sure all your exercises are gentle. Now, burst training should occur 3 to 6 times a week, okay? We want burst training. Research has shown that it is best for you to take at least 1 day a week off. That kind of goes with the sleep that Dr. Aysha was just telling us about. So burst training 3 to 6 times a week. And you're just going to slowly increase the length of your bursts. You can increase by 2 to 5 seconds in length. Maybe a week after you've started. If when you start and a week after you've started, all you can do is perform that 20-second burst, you're still doing your body good. You are still training up to being able to do more. So keep going at that lower level until your body is ready, tells you that it's ready to continue on. But you do want to keep pushing yourself to that hard to very hard level of breathing. Okay, the goal is to increase your heart rate, and breathing does matter. So you may sound like a dog panting and be gasping for air. I've had a respiratory condition recently. Breathing is still difficult for me. So I am not trying to do my burst sessions right now, even though I'm longing for it, not because I love burst training or cardio training, but because I was seeing progress in my health as I did it, and it felt better. So even though I hate doing it, I will continue doing it because it feels better. Realize that the conditions, whether it's the change in temperature outside to an increased temperature, whether you haven't been drinking the same amount of water as you need to, whether maybe you're fighting an illness like I have been, or allergies like I'm also dealing with right now, any of those things can challenge your breathing. And so you may need to lower your intensity for those things. And also remember the pursed lip breathing for recovery. So that's where we breathe in through our nose like we're smelling a rose bush. And then we blow out through our mouth like we're blowing out birthday candles. And that will help with the recovery process from these bursts. Okay, our session 3, we talked about variables where we can change the length of a burst session. We can add more bursts into an exercise session or more days of the week that we are burst training. We can increase our speed or vary the terrain or change which kind of exercise that we're doing. Whatever we do, we only change one of those variables at a time because we don't want to over challenge our body and make it too difficult for ourselves. Whatever we do, we should make it difficult enough that we are feeling all of those factors we already talked about, that we can tell that we've gotten a good cardio workout. And slowly you will find that your resting heart rate will decrease. It will slow down. This was one of the things I was seeing as I went to doctor's offices. I am getting allergy shots right now, and so I'm in and out a lot, and they measure my respiratory rate, my oxygen saturation, and my blood pressure. And I was seeing my blood pressure going down, and I was seeing my resting heart rate go down, and it was really exciting to watch as I did these burst trainings. So exercise session 4, we talked about stretching, holding our stretches for 15 to 30 seconds. Bigger muscles need more time. We talked about how muscles are like rubber bands, and that's why we use that amount of time. We talked about repeating each stretch 3 times on each side, not bouncing, not stretching to tears, which could be muscle tears at the same time, and watching our form very carefully while we stretched. Exercise session number 5 last week, we talked about breathing with our work, how we need to continue to do strength training. We talked about, again, watching our form with that strength training. We talked about how we were only moving one muscle group at a time, using our body to support the rest of our body firmly while we just move that one joint at a time, how we need to be efficient, how pain can happen. And if it does, we need to listen to that pain. But soreness is not the same thing as pain. Soreness shows up after the exercise is over. Pain would show up while the exercise is happening. We also gave you some resources, as you see the pictures again in the bottom corner, that you can use to follow your exercise journey and help hold yourself accountable. We talked about doing exercises for the arm and the core, the muscles of your core on one day, and doing a leg day another day, and how we need at least 2 days a week of exercises so that we can replace those muscle fibers that as we age like to shrink, and we can provide more strength and muscle. So your assignment this week continues to keep your aerobic exercise going. That's going to be more difficult when you don't have people checking in on you all the time. So build your accountability team. Find other people from your group that you can continue to check in with by text or by phone, so that you know that someone is going to help hold you accountable for this. Keep following the principles to breathe hard and stretching after each burst session. And make sure that you have at least 2 days a week of strengthening exercises if you haven't already added those in. I look forward to hearing your results this weekend. I hope you will look me up if you come to the church service, and we can meet one another and I can hear about your health journey. And I look forward to meeting you all and seeing your progress.
Well, let's review some final strategies for success. First of all, how do you define success? For some people, that would be to completely reverse type 2 diabetes. The American Diabetes Association defined diabetes remission quite a while ago, back in 2009, and they defined it as achieving glucose levels that are below the diabetes range in the absence of active medical or surgical treatments. And there are 2 types of remission. Partial remission occurs when blood sugars and A1C levels are below the diabetes range, but they're above normal, so they're in the pre-diabetes range. And then complete remission involves normal fasting blood sugars and A1Cs. And these levels of blood sugars need to be stable for a year without active therapy in order to say someone is in remission. The C-peptide test is one of the most helpful diabetes-related biomarkers. It's a protein that is secreted with insulin. So for every molecule of insulin that your pancreas makes, a molecule of C-peptide is made. And C-peptide indicates how much insulin your beta cells are able to manufacture and secrete into your blood. If your C-peptide level is at the high end of normal, or if it's above normal, that suggests that you have lots of insulin making capacity and you are likely to reverse type 2 diabetes. If your blood sugars during this program have rapidly dropped and you're off diabetes medications, you probably don't need to have a C-peptide level checked because you know your beta cells are working well. If your blood sugars, though, maybe aren't responding as rapidly as you'd expected, you may consider asking your doctor about checking a C-peptide. One thing to consider when choosing our meals is the volume of food we'll consume and how likely that food will cause us to eat too many calories. Research has shown that most people eat about the same weight of food on a daily basis. And they eat about 3 to 5 pounds of food per day, regardless of whether that food is high in calorie density, medium in calorie density, or low in calorie density. So we can, by eating foods low in calorie density, cut about 2,000 calories per day out of our diet and feel just as satisfied as if we were eating foods that are high in calorie density. Eating the majority of our foods from the green light category can maximize our chances of losing weight and increasing our insulin sensitivity at the same time. So which foods will keep you more full? 1/2 cup of dried apricots. Sorry, this is a lot more than half a cup in the picture. I just couldn't find a 1/2 cup measure of dried apricots in picture form. But 1/2 cup has 150 calories. And we could alternatively consume 9 whole apricots, which also contains 150 calories. Let's briefly review our green light, yellow light, and red light food categories. Green light foods include all of the fresh fruits. It excludes dried fruits like dates, as well as high fat fruits, as in avocados. Green light foods also include all non-starchy vegetables, all the starchy vegetables like the root vegetables and winter squash. Legumes such as beans, peas, and lentils are green light foods, and then intact whole grains. These are foods we can eat till we're satisfied. And then yellow light foods are somewhat processed whole plant foods. So these would be pastas that come from whole food ingredients, and then the more high fat whole foods like avocados, nuts, and seeds. Red light foods include the whole animal kingdom, plus refined carbohydrates and fats. So let's look at calorie density. Here's a list of select foods from the green, yellow, and red light categories. So looking at the green light foods, we have very low energy foods, watercress having just 50 calories per pound. And then we go down to fruits and the root vegetables, grains, and legumes, which have around 600 calories per pound. Yellow light foods may start at around 500 calories per pound with the whole food pastas. And then we have some more calorie dense, higher fat fruit. And then these foods, dates, bread, and dried figs are all types of carbohydrate, but they're dehydrated, and so they're higher in calorie density. And then almonds with their high fat content are pretty energy dense. And finally, we find red light foods ranging from, again, around 500 calories per pound up to olive oil, which is or oils in general, the highest energy dense food on the planet. So as you can see, there's actually overlap in energy density between the green light, yellow light, and red light food categories. But green light foods in general tend to be lower in energy density compared to the other two categories, and the red light foods are inflammatory. So here's an example of breakfast items that we could include if we're focusing on fiber and nutrient density. We can start with whole grains and fruit. These could be in a bowl, whole grains topped with fresh cut fruit, or you could do a cereal bowl. You could have your whole grains on the bottom, like your oat groats or your barley, and then you add fruit, maybe a non-dairy milk. And legumes are a great food to add to breakfast, especially if you're transitioning from a state of high insulin resistance. Legumes, like beans, peas, and lentils, are high in fiber, and that will help prevent our blood sugars from spiking after a meal. And remember, legumes have a second meal effect, so they keep our blood sugars stable even after the next meal. What about smoothies? Well, many people enjoy drinking smoothies in the morning instead of eating a bowl of fruit. It's often quicker and more convenient to purchase a smoothie at a cafe or a smoothie bar. And technically, you can combine the ingredients from a fruit bowl along with maybe some chia seeds or flax seeds into a blender and process that until it becomes a breakfast smoothie. But I don't recommend drinking your breakfast for a few reasons. First of all, carbohydrates are digested and absorbed more rapidly if the food is eaten whole. if the food is blended or processed rather than eaten whole. So when we use our teeth, when we mix our food with saliva, the process of absorption ends up being a little bit slower. And secondly, smoothies or blending fruit into smoothies turns the long fiber molecules in that fruit into shorter fiber molecules, reducing the amount of the fiber that's available for our microbiome, the bacteria in our gut. And finally, smoothies do cause blood sugar spikes for 1 to 3 hours after a meal. I have to say, I was a huge smoothie fan. And then when I was in fellowship, I wore a continuous glucose monitor for a number of days. And I noticed that my blood sugars did rise quite a bit higher after a smoothie meal compared to a meal of whole fruit. And so I can attest that smoothies do actually raise blood sugars after a meal. So for all these reasons, we recommend that we consume breakfast whole whenever possible. When constructing lunch, we can build the meal around some higher calorie green light foods. So these would be our starches, which could be vegetables, they could be intact whole grains, even legumes have quite a bit of carbohydrate and starch in them. So when planning your menu, think about what you're going to have for starch, what legume you might want to pair it with. And then we can always add in the non-starchy vegetables like our salad vegetables, our cooked green beans, or cooked zucchini with these starches and legumes. And then we also have condiments. These can be homemade. It's great if we can make them from clean ingredients. We have nuts and seeds, which will give us our polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. We could also buy our condiments like our gravies, our sauces, salad dressings from a store where we can get them made of green and yellow light ingredients. So this is just a basic way to plan a lunch menu, and it's a strategy for meal planning without using a lot of recipes. At supper time, we may not need to eat at all. We know there's that option of early time restricted feeding, and that's a great choice if we're trying to lose weight. If we do eat supper, the goal is to keep it small and simple. And this slide came from Dr. Linda Nelson, Eric Nelson's mother. And I think it just outlines the fact that we can choose a grain and pair it with fruit. We may include a type of legume as in a soup. Instead of the fruit, we could have a salad as well. And we want to schedule supper several hours before bedtime. Now that we know what foods are best to eat, it's time to commit to meal planning. This can also be referred to as meal committing. And there are two important questions. What do I want to eat for each meal over the next 7 days? And then which ingredients should I buy for the coming week? Write down your plan for each meal on a sheet of paper. And remember to include restaurants or cafes that you plan to visit. In time, this exercise may become second nature, but until then, I highly recommend writing down your plan. This will allow you to think through any challenges or obstacles, and it'll prepare you to know exactly what to buy from the grocery store. So what about when we're dining out? Well, there are several steps we can consider. First of all, we can look for a diabetes rewind-friendly restaurant. There are a number of options. Asian restaurants like Thai, Vietnamese, and Japanese often have a variety of green light foods to choose from. Mexican restaurants and Middle Eastern restaurants will often have whole grains and beans, but you could also find these items at an all-you-can-eat bar. And even a steakhouse is likely to have a baked potato as well as salads. So after choosing your restaurant, look at the menu for the ingredients available. And you may be able to view the menu even before entering the restaurant. You can often view it online. And when you're looking at the menu, you can think of it as a choose your own adventure book. Look for the starchy vegetables prepared without oil, cheese, or butter. And you want to look, of course, for beans prepared without lard or butter. And look at the individual items in the dishes. So in addition to looking at the dishes, find out what they're including, so you know what ingredients you have to work with. Then if you're eating with a group, one way to kind of politely plan your meal without being awkward is to leave the table. It may just look like you're getting up to use the restroom, and find the server on the restaurant floor. And you could say something like, I have a different diet than most people because I'm living with diabetes. And I'm curious if you could help me create a custom dish based on ingredients in your menu. Usually when you explain that your choices are from a health condition, the server's defenses will drop and they will answer with an emphatic yes. Then after explaining your wish to create this custom or to have this custom meal, thank your server. And then at the table, you'll be set when everyone is going around making their requests. The server will already know what you're planning on. Another final reminder is that in order to optimize our insulin sensitivity, we want to avoid snacks. Our goal is to eat 2 or 3 meals a day, 5 to 6 hours apart, and to have a nice long overnight fast. So what if you find yourself hungry a couple hours after a meal? Usually increasing your portion sizes for that particular meal, whether it's breakfast or lunch, and especially adding more whole grains or legumes will solve this problem quickly. A study of adults with type 2 diabetes put them on 2 different meal patterns. So the same group of individuals were put on these 2 meal patterns for 12 weeks. In one pattern, they were eating 3 meals a day with 3 snacks. So that was called the 6 meal per day diet. And then for another 12 weeks, they were eating 2 meals a day. And the first meal was consumed by 10 in the morning and the second meal by 4 in the afternoon. And both groups were restricting their calories equally. During the time on the 2 meals per day, persons reduced their waist circumference about 4 times what those eating 6 meals a day reduced their waist circumference. BMI dropped quite a bit more on 2 meals compared to 6 meals a day. Fasting blood glucose dropped 14 points versus about 8.5 points on the 6 meals a day. And insulin sensitivity on 2 meals a day increased about 2.5 times what it did on 6 meals a day. So clearly 2 meals a day were more favorable for promoting weight loss and improving insulin sensitivity. As we have seen, type 2 diabetes is common and it's becoming more common rapidly. Thankfully, we have a number of lifestyle medicines that can prevent, treat, or even reverse type 2 diabetes. A lot of these lifestyle habits are countercultural and are not natural for us to implement. But as Kendra said, when we learn new information, we need spiritual insight. Thankfully, we are blessed with many Bible promises. Truly, God's grace can be sufficient for us. It's been my pleasure meeting with you these past 6 weeks. I wish you God's abundant blessings as you continue your journey toward optimal health.